One. Today is September the 10th, 2020, and this is the Nicholson Nugget. And I'm here today with, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hey, good day. My name is Tarah Baldwin. I'm a local attorney here in Indianapolis, up here on the north side, and I'm happy to be here.
And she does a lot of work with juvenile offenders, people that are accused of crimes and they're under the age of 18. Also, I used to work with her at the Marion County Public Defender Agency briefly. She's a fantastic attorney in person and kind of recently opened up your own law firm. Is that right?
Yeah, Baldwin Legal Group opened up September 1st. It's a great new project. Excited to represent individuals in estate administration, estate planning matters, as well as guardianships. And then I also have a juvenile justice practice where I focus on criminal defense for clients who are accused of what would be crimes if they were adults.
All right. And then after this is over, you'll send a link that has to your website or to your information so people will be able to click on it. Great.
Yeah.
And it looks like what's on your shirt? It looks like what's that saying?
I know you like the superheroes, so I went with Wonder Woman today.
Awesome.
So
Awesome.
we show up in court to fight for our clients, and so we like our superheroes.
There you go. And take that lasso of truth and put it around those officers so that make them tell the truth about what they're doing. You know,
That's right. Avoid a travesty of justice.
that's right. Yes, that's my phrase, travesty of justice. And also another good thing about you wearing that shirt is, they have another Wonder Woman movie coming out. Wonder Woman 1984 is coming out
That's
recently.
awesome.
Yeah,
It's going to be really cool. Those are great movies.
it got delayed a little bit because of COVID, so I think it's coming out either later this year or 2021. But I've seen some trailers for it. It looks really good.
Yeah,
The 1980s, it's awesome.
I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, talking about COVID and how it's affected, the movie industry.
Yeah.
Um, what concerns, during this time of COVID? Because you mentioned estate planning, and
Mhm.
can you first, I guess, define what estate planning is for people that don't know what it is?
Absolutely. So estate planning is documents that you prepare that are about your wishes and what you would like your plan to be. And so when we sit down with a client and do estate planning, we are talking about your last will and testament, where you would like your belongings, your assets to go. And then we have also where we do a HIPAA authorization, and we talk about healthcare representatives. We talk about power of attorney, and those healthcare representative forms and power of attorney forms have been something that a lot of clients have really wanted to dig into and talk about because of COVID-19 having such a span of people who don't show symptoms at all. And then also individuals who we find are spending time in comas, away from family. Family are not allowed to be in the rooms with the patient because of obvious concerns of spreading this disease, and then also to keep everybody safe and help the patient to make it through. But what happens is if you're not able to make decisions on your own, and you do not have a power of attorney form or a healthcare representative form, there's no one who can speak for you, that the doctors know where to go to and to ask these questions. Or if you're unable to make your financial decisions to pay your bills because you're in the hospital, that's what a power of attorney form is for. Powers of attorney can be very limited. You can have the limited scope to just be, hey, pay my bills for me if I'm unable to out of my accounts, all the way to covering your full estate, meaning your real estate, your investments. And then also you can talk about powers of attorney when you appoint someone. If a guardianship is needed over you, the court's going to look to see if a power of attorney document is in play, because it tells the court, hey, you trusted this person with very important information in your life and to make important decisions for you. And if a guardianship is appropriate, this is somebody that we need to look really heavily at in our decision making as to who's the best interest option as a guardian for the individual. And healthcare representatives, they're there to help make healthcare decisions. And so this is a person who you trust to determine whether or not, in the horrible situation, to pull the plug or not. And that's a lot of trust that you need to have in someone. but you want to be able to designate who that person is, and not leave it up to statutes that give kind of a hierarchy of decisions, because not everyone would like for their spouse to make that decision, or one of their children to make a healthcare decision for them, because not everybody's family situation is the same. It's not all what we'll see on television, like happy families all together. And so that's why those forms, those documents are so important to clients, is to delve into. They're not difficult documents to draft up for clients. They're not time consuming for clients. As a lot of people think, estate planning just takes a lot of money and a lot of time to do, and it's really not. It should be very reasonable for you and your family. You should be able to sit down with counsel and have a discussion about what your wishes are. It's drafted up, and then you come in and execute the documents, meaning you sign, depending on what document it is, either in front of witnesses, which the attorney will provide, or you can bring with you, and then or a notary, which we have here in our office as well.
So one of the phrases you said was when you sit down with your counsel, are you doing sit down in person client consultations?
We like to give people options. Right now, everybody's at a different comfort level. I do request that people wear masks in our office. And, I like the fancier, the better. You could have a plain Indy mask that, we got here in Indianapolis from our local government, or you can get fancy with it. So we have that option of in-house meetings, socially distanced. We're able to do that here in our offices, as well as Zoom, and we can do phone conferences too. Realizing that family members are all over the country, we have the opportunity now with all the technology to sit down, and if you have appointed somebody as power of attorney, but you want to tell them what that means, and you want to sit down with counsel so they can answer whatever questions they need to be able to successfully execute what your plan is, happy to do that.
Awesome. Now, you've talked a lot about estate planning. I mentioned a little bit about representing juvenile defendants. What areas do you practice? I know you kind of went through a list in the very beginning, but can you talk a little bit about the other areas you practice and how and explain them to?
Yeah, so we talked about estate planning, and then there's also estate administration. This is after a loved one has passed. We take a look at whether they had a will or not, and then we go from there, discovering what assets they had, who the beneficiaries are. And really our goal as an office is to make this process as easy as possible for the clients. And that really comes from having a sit-down consultation, which is free of charge with our office, and seeing what your options are, what's part of the estate, what's not, and what's best for the clients to move forward. Because at that time, they've just lost a loved one, and so they really should be able to provide the information and then hand it off and let our office take it and run with it for them. And then I also do guardianships. This is of either adults who are in need of protection or are incapacitated, or also with minor children where guardianships may be appropriate. I do both uncontested and contested guardianships all over the state of Indiana. And then, of course, criminal defense for juveniles. I represent juveniles all across the country, or across the state, excuse me. In matters, I do handle waivers. So when children are accused of crimes where the state has filed a petition for a waiver to move them from the juvenile justice system into the adult system, we handle those here in-house. With all of these practice areas, what they all have in common is that you need an attorney who can communicate with you, who can answer your questions, who's there to give you all the information. No matter what area of law you're in, you have to be able to give information to the client and let them make the decision on how they want their legal journey to go. And as long as my clients know all the information, we go from there, and we are able to execute a legal strategy together. And I take great pride in the fact that my clients know going into court exactly what the different options are that can happen, what the law is, and that they're very educated about their case and their circumstance before we ever take that first step into court.
When you say that you kind of educate them about their options going to court. What kind of cases do you represent of juvenile cases?
So juveniles, when we talk about the juvenile code, that's the whole criminal code. Juveniles can be accused of what would be any crime that an adult could be accused of. And then there's also truancy and some of your status offenses as well, running away from home. Those are things we don't see in the adult court system that we'll see in the juvenile system. But if you are in the juvenile courts, you have a right to an attorney. And so I find that, when you're a child, your risk assessment is very low. Actually, your risk assessment doesn't fully develop until you're 24 or 25. Juvenile jurisdiction ends at 21. So we still have a gap there. And many times when I meet with clients who are adults who have any type of criminal background, a lot of it is from their early 20s or older teens. And I always have found that the science as well as the law meeting in that way is really interesting. But what we do is a juvenile, when they're brought into court, there is a petition to find them to be delinquent, and it will have an accusation on it. And so the very first interaction that I have with a client is getting that documentation. So getting what the petition is, of what the allegation is going to be, the charging information, and then getting the preliminary inquiry. Those have to be done on every juvenile case. A petition cannot be approved by the court without a preliminary inquiry. And sitting down with them and with the probable cause affidavit, that is the document that's prepared by a police officer and sworn under oath that these are the circumstances that occurred according to the police officer. This is what the charging information is coming from the prosecutor's office. So sit down with the child and go over what this is. And then it's important for me to have the client, the child, tell me in their own words what we just discussed. Because you can talk to adults who are in their 30s and 40s, highly educated individuals who don't understand our criminal justice system. And so when you're dealing with children, it's really important. One interesting fact that the majority of my clients find fascinating is that parents can be used as witnesses against their children here in Indiana. There is not a confidentiality or a privilege between a child and their either guardian or their parent. And so when we meet with our clients, that is just with the client, with the child, because of attorney-client privilege. We will obviously, if the client wants to get advice from their parent on certain things, we will bring the parent in. But we'll also say if the child doesn't want their parent involved, we have to say, I'm sorry, attorney-client privilege, which is the greatest privilege that we have as attorneys just in protecting our clients, is to be able to have that communication with them that stays between them so that they can ask any question that they have, so they can know what their full exposure is in the criminal justice system, so that they can know what decisions they need to make that are best for them without fear from anyone else impacting them. Which is why when you hear judges ask clients in court who may take a plea agreement, did anyone force you or promise you anything to take this plea agreement? That's not just from opposing sides promising you anything, but also when you're dealing with children, that it's not a guardian or parent or an older sibling who has said, hey, like, go ahead and do this for me, and or you should do this. They have to be able to make that decision on their own. And so it's literally taking children and putting them in an adult situation, even though it's the juvenile system, that they have to make really big decisions.
Okay. Now, with the trials, and you mentioned that you have a right to counsel as a juvenile, and then there's not an attorney-client privilege between the parent or any kind of confidentiality like you think some people might think of with a husband and wife that are married. How do trials work? Do they have jury trials for juveniles, or is it what they call bench trial? Okay, no juries.
All bench trials. Man, I would love a jury trial. I wish that juveniles had a jury trial, right? I'm pretty sure every criminal defense attorney wishes that juveniles had a jury trial, right? But no, they are only bench trial. It's very important when a juvenile criminal defense attorney takes a case that they explain that from the very beginning to the client and advise them of all of their rights, and all of their rights do not include jury trial. And sometimes the only exposure that your client has had to the criminal justice system is TV. And you have to say, this is not like TV. This is not like Netflix. This is, this is the parameters in which you have. And sometimes I get asked really silly things, and I was like, this is not lawyers as seen on TV, and we go through stuff. But
That's really unfortunate, given the fact that in Indiana you can have a traffic offense and have a jury trial on a traffic offense, but yet if someone is accused of a crime and they're a juvenile, they can't have a jury trial.
And juveniles get accused of traffic crimes. I mean, OBWI, OBWI causing death, reckless homicide because of traffic issues, traffic activity. So yeah, I mean, it is interesting. And the only time that you'll find a juvenile that gets a jury right is if they've been waived to adult court. Okay. And at that time, the adult charges then pick up. It becomes a case in itself in the adult court, and then they would get a jury trial attachment.
Wow, interesting. Now, when you say juvenile, when I hear that word, I think of everything involving kids. And that may not be the case. So there's something called CHINS, Child in Need of Services.
Yes.
And there's other things that involved with that,
PPR,
what I call
termination of parental rights.
Yes. So,
and those intermingle. They
yes.
do. They intermingle into. I would say when I was a public defender here in Marion County with the juvenile division, many of my cases where the child would be a part of a CHINS case that was running parallel to this, or sometimes they would, the delinquency portion of things would cause a CHINS case. And it's very important to also understand that juveniles have a right to be at those CHINS hearings and at those TPR hearings as well. The statutes allow for judges to appoint attorneys for children in those particular cases, but it is not required for them to do so. But it is an option in under the statute. Many times my clients would be detained and would not be able to attend a CHINS hearing. And so I would go, not on their behalf because I only represented them in the juvenile case, but would go to see what was going on in that case and just appear and to listen to see how it would impact my client's juvenile delinquency case. Especially when you're talking about placement options for children. If home isn't an option, if home is unsafe, you have to find a safe place for this child to go, come up with options. I never want the Department of Corrections to be the only option presented to a judge in regard to a child. That is a very last ditch decision or factor. And I've actually had cases where other officials from administrations here in town who were in charge of finding placements for children who've said, oh, well, we just are going to say they should go to DOC. And I'm like, that is not a foster care placement. That is not a loving home. That is the last place that we want to send a child. The whole reason that we have a juvenile justice system is rehabilitation and to allow children to have access to therapies, treatments, mentors, education, meals, have utilities in their home so that they can become thriving adult citizens that make a difference. And that my hope is some of my clients who have been successful in getting GEDs or finishing their high school diplomas will go on to do great things. And sometimes when you look at your client, obviously most of them are under the age of 18. You ask them what they want to do when they're older, it's the first time they've ever heard that question. And so it's nice to be able to take our system, our juvenile justice system, and use it for what it's there for. And that's to make the child better and give them opportunity.
So these cases that you're talking about, like the chins and all, and you said that they've had your clients have a right, but sometimes they're being held in custody and they cannot attend. Do you also practice in the area of, I guess, Chin's law or whatever they call it, DCS? I call them DCS cases and
DCS
things.
cases.
Yeah, that's what I call them. But
I do some, and many a times it's because the juvenile case will interact with that. Sometimes you hear stories that just make you mad, so you just want to get involved. So because, you know, as a former public defender, like that's the fire that we will always have in our bellies. If something seems unjust, we're going
right.
to show up for it.
Yes.
So yeah.
Yes. So with the juvenile case that you handle, and you said you're local, you're here in Indianapolis. What other counties do you practice in? You know, normally.
All counties. I will, and I especially find too, in counties that don't have public defender agencies that have contract attorneys that have contracts with the courts to offer public defender services. I will be brought in on those types of cases too. And I enjoy working in all counties. I really do. It's my most important thing of my practice is meeting with the child wherever it is before we go in for an initial hearing. Because before they go in for that initial hearing, they need to know what is happening, what the charges are that are being brought against them, what court is like. It's important too that to know that children should not be shackled in court. There needs to be a hearing before the hearing in regard to why any type of restraints are needed on the child. And that needs to be put into the record. I think that's really, really important. Because again, dealing with children, and that's a lot, walking into a courtroom in front of a judge who's sitting up above them, you know, looking down, and so very important from the very beginning that the child knows before they ever step into court what's happening and why.
So when you say that and I agree with you too, I even with adults, have them shackled, especially if they're going to trial, and for people to see that. And normally, they have that covered, at least in the adult court. They'll have a tablecloth thing hanging down so you can't see that their legs are shackled, and then they'll have them dressed in civilian clothes oftentimes. But the contracts that you mentioned in other counties, do you have certain counties that you have a contract, where they have this contract that you're talking about?
I don't have contracts with any counties. I work strictly with private clients.
Okay.
And some of the counties that I have cases, there are contracted public defenders that are available, and the client has chosen to hire private counsel. And I think that's great, obviously, as the private counsel, but I really enjoy working with juveniles. I think it's a great area. And also you have the opportunity, because juvenile justice is constantly evolving, options for when we talk about sentencing of a juvenile are constantly evolving. More information is getting out to the public about how we address certain behaviors, how we address certain crimes, and obviously the opportunity too is that within the juvenile system, you want to make sure that everything's confidential. Like you give the person the opportunity to grow. Something that I have found over the years that was really interesting to me is that juvenile drug cases, where you would have what would be a felony drug offense if you were an adult. As a child, a lot of times we think, okay, that goes away. It's confidential. No one will know about it. However, in the federal system, they consider drug charges as a juvenile as a consideration in sentencing if you have a federal drug charge pending and before that court. So small caveats like that of knowing that even though it's a juvenile case, you need to know any ramifications as an adult. And it doesn't mean they're confidential. And no, maybe not everybody can look it up, but a judge can see it. A prosecutor can still see it. You as a criminal defense attorney would be able to see the criminal history provided as well. And so, I don't know if you've seen this in your practice where things will come up during sentencing. Well, let's say, well, they had all of these things during juvenile years as well, and try to paint that into, their sentencing argument for the adult case.
Yes. Yeah. So it's really somewhat a surprise to some clients that have these juvenile, I don't really call them convictions. Yeah, and then they're true finding. I think I've heard that phrase.
Yeah.
They were true.
Yeah, so they're true or not true. Not guilty. It's not guilty or guilty. It's true or not true.
Right, and so when the prosecutor brings it up in adult court, that they're like, "Well, that was a long time ago," or "I thought that stuff was sealed," or "They couldn't use it against me." And here is the prosecutor talking about, well, in juvenile they had this, they had this, they had this, and the person, maybe in their 40s or whatever or older, and it's just like, wow, they're just kind of just shocked that stuff is still being used against them. So
well, there is the expungement too for cases. I mean, there's many types of expungement, but for juveniles, when a case is brought against them and then the charges are dismissed, that's a shall expunge. I mean, even though it's a juvenile case, I've probably filed hundreds of them because I filed them on all of my public defender cases, and like in Marion County, I would just, before we closed a case, like a child was getting done with probation or whatever, their disposition alternatives were, I filed those. And so, and I had clients where if they picked up another case in another county, it saved them from waiver.
Wow,
because they had reached over the age of 16 and had allegedly committed a crime. And waiver isn't, they did this, and so they're going to go to adult court. There's just probable cause found by the court that the child has committed one of the crimes that allows for them to be waived if the court finds it to be in the best interest of the community. And there's several factors that the court decides in that court order. But expungements are really important. They're really, really important, even in juvenile level. I think that they're excellent for adults, because I'd like to see it where we don't have to have, even for higher level felony offenses, prosecutorial approval on some of these. I'd like it to all just be able to go in front of a judge and let the judge be the deciding factor, because something to me I always thought it was interesting is OVWI causing death is considered a violent offense. And so you've got people who drank, got behind the wheel, killed someone, served their time, get back out into the community and cannot find jobs. You can't find a job at Walmart because they have bullets and guns and knives, and they're not going to hire somebody who's a violent offender. And so that's, I think, a really interesting consideration, especially like if you were a juvenile. And I've had these circumstances, a juvenile who committed OVWI causing death, serves their time, but after they've been waived into adult court, serves their time, cannot get a job in some of these areas because of they're considered a violent offender.
Wow. Yes. Definitely there's some reforms that need to take place in different areas of the law, whether it's OVWI, drug cases, as we see now through years and years of people trying to legalize marijuana and all that. Now here it is. I mean, you see this push, and I think recently even Congress, the leaders of the House of Representatives, even put forth some legislation or proposed legislation dealing with the legalization of marijuana. So we've come a long way, and it's really because there have been people out there fighting for some of these changes that are somewhat draconian. Expungements here in Indiana, like you mentioned, even for an adult, getting the expungement, something I didn't think would ever happen. And there's a lot of changes that happen almost every year. It seems like they keep tweaking it, but it is there. It's on the books, and the people can still get them. And like you said, with the juveniles, there's a shell expunge. So, and in Marion County, at least, one of the few counties that allows early expungement for adults. So that's something that's favorable for people that are in that situation.
Yeah.
I want to thank you for your time. And is there anything else you would like to let people know about you or your practice or the law before we end? And I will make sure that I post your contact information too, as well. So, yeah.
Well, I look forward, if anybody has any questions on anything that we talked about today, feel free to reach out at contact@baldwinlegal.llc. So that's BALDWINLEGAL.LLC for our email, or you can see us at baldwinlegal.llc. So good website coming soon, and we're happy to answer any questions.
What about a phone number for people that may want to call?
Good call, 317-871-1948.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for taking your time out today. And it's great seeing you. I'm so glad that you're doing well in your practice. And I look forward to talking to you again.
You
Bye-bye.
too.
Yeah.
Bye.